A millionaire invites his ex-wife to his wedding, hoping to see her suffer. But when she arrives with 3 children who look exactly like him, the truth unravels in front of everyone. What happens next will change their lives forever. Don't forget to subscribe, share this video with your friends, and let us know where you're watching from in the comments. Adam Rivers sat in his sleek, glass-walled office, a place that towered above the city skyline like a monument to his success. Outside, the world moved in an orchestrated dance of ambition and power. Cars rushing through congested streets, people hurrying to work, corporations rising and falling in the cutthroat world of business. But inside this fortress of luxury and wealth, Adam was untouchable. His life was a carefully constructed empire. He had built it from the ground up, sacrificing relationships, friendships, and anything that didn't serve his ultimate goal. He had played the long game, made the ruthless decisions, and emerged victorious. Now, he was on the brink of solidifying his legacy even further. His upcoming marriage to Victoria Lawrence, one of Hollywood's most sought-after actresses, was more than just a personal milestone. It was a power move, a statement to the world that Adam Rivers had it all. The wedding, set to take place in 2 weeks, was the event of the year. Lavish beyond reason, meticulously planned, and attended by the most influential names in business, entertainment, and politics, it would cement his position at the top of society. Yet, as he reviewed the final guest list, an idea took root in his mind, something dark and satisfying, something that made a slow smirk spread across his lips. Naomi Brooks. The name was like an old song he hadn't heard in years, familiar but distant. She had been his wife once, back when his company was still in its infancy, back when he was still a man who had space for love. He had loved her in his own way, passionately, recklessly, possessively, but ultimately she had not fit into his vision of success. She wanted things he couldn't give: time, presence, a real partnership. In the end, she had walked away, leaving him with nothing but a few parting words about his inability to love anything but his ambition. Adam had barely given her a second thought after that. He had moved on, built an empire, conquered the business world, and surrounded himself with people who understood the rules: win or be forgotten. Naomi had been left behind, just another casualty of his rise to power. But now, as he sat in his office, the idea of her seeing him now, seeing what he had become, what she had lost, was too delicious to ignore. He picked up his phone and called his personal assistant, Andrea. "Send an invitation to Naomi Brooks," he said smoothly. "Make sure it reaches her personally." Andrea hesitated only for a fraction of a second, barely perceptible. "Naomi Brooks?" she repeated, as if confirming she had heard correctly. "Yes," Adam said, his voice calm but with an undercurrent of something else, something cold. "Let's see if she's curious enough to show up." He ended the call, leaning back in his chair, fingers steepled together. The thought of Naomi walking into his wedding, seeing the extravagance, the perfection, the wealth, and knowing she was nothing but a relic of his past. Oh, it was satisfying. He could already picture her, older, perhaps struggling, realizing too late what she had given up. She would be nothing compared to Victoria, flawless, radiant, the perfect image of success at his side. It would be a lesson in power, in consequence. Naomi had left him, but now she would have to see exactly what she had walked away from. Naomi Brooks stood in her small, sunlit studio, the scent of fresh paint and turpentine filling the air. She was putting the final strokes on a canvas, a vibrant, expressive piece that captured emotion in its rawest form. Her art was her sanctuary, the place where she poured all the emotions she didn't have time to process. Her life was far from the opulence she had once been a part of, but it was full. She had 3 beautiful sons, Caleb, Jaden, and Eli, who were her entire world. Raising them alone had not been easy, but she had never regretted her decision to leave Adam. She had made peace with her past. At least, she had thought so. When the thick, cream-colored envelope arrived, she almost didn't open it. But curiosity, or something deeper, got the best of her. As her eyes moved over the elegantly scripted words, she felt her stomach twist. Adam Rivers and Victoria Lawrence cordially invite you to celebrate their union. Naomi read the words twice, then a third time, before carefully setting the invitation down on her work table. A part of her wanted to throw it away, to forget she had ever seen it. But another part of her, one she had ignored for years, felt something else. It wasn't regret. No, she had never regretted leaving Adam. It was unfinished business. Her sons had started asking about their father. They were old enough now to notice things, to realize that while other kids had dads, they had only ever had her. She had never lied to them, but she had also never told them the full truth. Maybe it was time. Maybe they deserved to see who their father really was. Maybe it was time for Adam to see what he had left behind. Taking a deep breath, she folded the invitation and set it aside. She would go. Not for him, for them. The day of Adam Rivers' wedding had finally arrived. The estate, a sprawling architectural marvel set on the cliffs overlooking the Pacific, was alive with the hum of conversation, laughter, and the clinking of champagne glasses. Guests arrived in sleek black cars, stepping onto the red carpet that led into the grand hall, where golden chandeliers cast a warm glow over the extravagance that surrounded them. Every detail had been meticulously arranged. White roses adorned every surface. A live orchestra played soft classical music, and uniformed staff moved through the crowd with practiced grace. Adam stood near the entrance, exuding confidence in a tailored tuxedo, his sharp features reflecting the poise of a man who had won at life. His bride, Victoria Lawrence, was stunning in an intricately designed gown, her presence radiating elegance and status. This was the moment he had orchestrated, the pinnacle of his achievements, and soon the ceremony would begin. But beneath his polished exterior, a small part of him was waiting, watching. He hadn't heard from Naomi since the invitation had been sent. She hadn't RSVP'd, hadn't given any sign that she would come. He told himself he didn't care. Whether she showed up or not was irrelevant. But a darker part of him wanted her to walk through those doors, to see the life he had built without her, to witness the perfection that had taken her place. And then it happened. The doors at the far end of the grand hall opened, and a hush fell over the room. Adam turned, his breath catching for just a moment, so slight that no one would have noticed, except he felt it deep in his chest. Naomi had arrived. She walked in with quiet confidence, her head held high, her movements unhurried, as though she had all the time in the world. She wasn't here to beg or to gawk at his success. She was here because she chose to be, and that realization sent a ripple of something unexpected through him. She looked different. Not in the way that time had taken something from her, but in the way that it had given her something else. Strength, independence, a sense of self that had nothing to do with him. But it wasn't just Naomi that had caught everyone's attention. 3 young boys walked beside her, dressed in matching suits, their small hands gripping hers as they took in the grandeur of the wedding with wide, curious eyes. A murmur spread through the guests. People whispered behind their hands, glancing between the boys and Adam, the resemblance unmistakable. And suddenly, the room felt smaller. Victoria, standing beside him, tensed. He could feel the way her posture shifted, her perfectly composed expression hardening at the edges. Naomi had come, but not alone. She had brought them, his sons. The realization hit like a sledgehammer to his chest. The boys, Caleb, Jaden, and Eli, were his. There was no denying it. Their faces, their expressions, the way one of them furrowed his brow in a way Adam had seen in the mirror countless times. He had sons, and he had never known. For the first time in years, Adam felt something he didn't recognize, something raw and unsettling. Naomi met his gaze from across the hall, her expression unreadable. She wasn't here for a scene, wasn't here to cause chaos, but her presence alone had unraveled everything. Victoria's fingers curled tightly around Adam's arm, her nails digging slightly into the fabric of his sleeve. She didn't say anything, yet. She was too poised, too trained in the art of maintaining an image to cause a scene in front of their esteemed guests. But he could feel the question burning inside her, unspoken but heavy between them. Who are those children? Adam's throat was dry. The room waited, eyes flicking between him and Naomi, between the woman from his past and the bride standing beside him, between the three boys who were undeniably his and the man who had just realized that his past wasn't as neatly buried as he had believed. Then Naomi spoke. Her voice was calm, steady. She didn't raise it, but in the silence of the room, every word was heard clearly. I didn't come here for you, Adam. Her eyes flicked to the boys before settling back on him. I came because they deserve to know who their father is. A cold, sharp silence followed. Victoria finally let go of his arm, stepping slightly away from him, her carefully constructed mask cracking just enough for Adam to see the fury simmering beneath it. This was not how today was supposed to go. This was not how his story was supposed to unfold. But it was too late to stop it now. The air in the grand hall grew thick with tension, the murmurs of the guests swelling into a low hum. Eyes darted between Adam, Victoria, Naomi, and the three boys standing beside their mother. The resemblance between Adam and the children was undeniable. Whispers rippled through the crowd, speculation spreading like wildfire. The opulence of the event, the extravagant floral arrangements, the perfectly poised guests, all of it now seemed like a fragile illusion, one that was cracking under the weight of this unexpected revelation. Adam's jaw tightened, his mind racing as he tried to process what was happening. He had never anticipated this. He had expected Naomi to arrive looking regretful, defeated, envious of everything he had built without her. Instead, she stood there, her gaze steady, unshaken, exuding a quiet confidence that unnerved him. And those boys, his sons, were looking up at him with expressions ranging from curiosity to apprehension, their small hands still gripping their mother's. Victoria moved first. With a sharp intake of breath, she turned toward Adam, her perfectly sculpted features barely masking her anger. She was a woman accustomed to control, to perfection, and this moment, this scene playing out in front of the most influential people in the city, was a disaster beyond measure. Her voice was low, strained, meant only for his ears, but her words carried the sharp edge of fury. "What is this, Adam?" He had no answer. His throat was dry, his usual composure slipping. For the first time in years, he felt unprepared, caught off guard in a way that shook him to his core. His mind scrambled for explanations, for a way to contain the situation before it spiraled further out of control. But there was no containing this. It was already unraveling in front of him. Naomi did not move, did not flinch, did not offer any explanations. She simply stood, waiting. She was not here to beg, not here to cause a scene, but her presence alone had done exactly that. A ripple of movement among the guests signaled the arrival of reporters, their cameras flashing subtly from the edges of the crowd. Someone had already texted a journalist. The story would spread within minutes. Billionaire Adam Rivers. Secret children. A former wife appearing at his wedding. The scandal would be unstoppable. Victoria stepped back from Adam, just enough to put space between them, enough for the guests to see the distance forming between them. It was a calculated move. She would not allow herself to be humiliated by association. One of the boys, Caleb, if Adam remembered correctly from the few details he had absorbed in the haze of shock, tilted his head slightly, studying him. His expression was unreadable, but there was something sharp in his gaze, something questioning. The weight of that small, assessing look made Adam's stomach tighten. Then Naomi spoke again, her voice even, controlled, yet carrying an undeniable power. "I don't need anything from you, Adam. I never did, but they deserve to know who their father is." The words cut through the room, silencing even the last of the whispers. Naomi was not here to plead, not here to seek revenge. She had simply delivered the truth, and now it was on him to decide what to do with it. Victoria exhaled sharply, crossing her arms. She was livid, though she was too well trained in public image to let it fully show. Her voice, however, dripped with venom. "This is unbelievable," she hissed. "How long were you planning to keep this little detail from me, Adam?" He had no answer because he hadn't known. That was the part that shook him the most. He had not known. And yet, standing here now, staring at the three boys who carried pieces of his face, it felt impossible that he had ever lived unaware of them. Naomi's gaze remained unreadable, but there was something else in it now, something final. She had delivered the truth, and she was ready to walk away. Victoria had seen enough. With a quiet, dangerous calm, she turned on her heel and strode towards the doors, her head held high, her movements graceful despite the tension crackling around her. The train of her wedding gown swept behind her as she disappeared into the hall beyond. She did not need to say the words out loud. The message was clear. This wedding was over. Adam stood frozen in the aftermath, the weight of the moment pressing down on him like a vice. The murmurs among the guests grew louder now, a mix of fascination, disbelief, and quiet amusement from those who thrived on the downfall of the powerful. Naomi remained where she was for a moment longer, then turned to her sons, giving them a reassuring nod. "Let's go," she said simply. She had no interest in lingering in this spectacle. She had given them this opportunity, to see the man who had been absent their whole lives. But if Adam was unwilling to step forward, she would not force it. As she began to walk away, the boys following beside her, something inside Adam cracked. He had spent years convincing himself that he had no regrets, that everything he had done, every sacrifice he had made, had been necessary to achieve the life he now had. But as he watched Naomi and his sons walking out of the grand hall, away from him, from everything he had built, a terrible realization settled over him. For the first time in his life, Adam Rivers was losing something he couldn't replace. The room had not yet settled from the storm that had just passed through it. The whispers remained, the eyes still followed him, and yet Adam Rivers felt as if he were standing alone in the grand hall of what was supposed to be his perfect wedding. The air was thick with speculation, And despite the lavish decorations and the carefully curated atmosphere of wealth and status, the event had transformed into something else entirely. He could still see Naomi leading the boys away, their small hands in hers, their backs turned to him. The weight of it pressed against his chest in a way that nothing ever had before. Victoria was gone, her heels clicking against the marble as she left without looking back. The crowd parted for her, no one daring to stop the woman whose entire world had just been shattered in front of hundreds of witnesses. And yet, Adam knew, despite everything, it was not Victoria he was thinking about. The moment Naomi had spoken, the moment she had stood before him and declared with such certainty that she had come only for their children, everything he had believed to be true about his past fractured into something unrecognizable. He had assumed she had walked away from their life together and moved on, assumed that she had resented him but ultimately disappeared into insignificance. Never had it occurred to him that she had been carrying something far more important than bitterness. She had been carrying his legacy, his bloodline, his sons. He wanted to move, wanted to stop her from leaving, but his feet felt rooted in place, his mind still struggling to keep up with what had just unfolded. The world around him did not grant him time to think. The murmurs continued, more insistent now as people realized that the bride was gone and the groom had just been left in the middle of a scandal that no amount of money or reputation could immediately erase. A few guests had the audacity to approach, their expressions carefully neutral, but their eyes filled with interest. A man from a rival tech firm offered a too pleasant smile. "Well, Adam," he said smoothly, swirling the whiskey in his glass, "I'd say congratulations are in order. A father to 3. Quite the surprise." Adam didn't respond. His fingers clenched at his sides. The businessman was not congratulating him. He was watching, enjoying the unraveling of a man who had always been untouchable. Further away, a group of investors whispered amongst themselves. He caught snippets of their conversation. Words like reckless and irresponsible filtered through the air. He knew how this worked. In their world, perception was everything, and the perception of Adam Rivers had just been rewritten. Andrea, his assistant, approached with cautious steps, her usual poised demeanor faltering as she stood beside him. She leaned in slightly, her voice low but urgent. "Do you need me to do something?" There was nothing to do. The damage had already been done. The reporters who had been given access to cover the wedding now had their own breaking news, their camera lenses shifting away from the grand floral arrangements and the star-studded guest list to the scene that had unfolded at the center of it all. Adam turned away from the lingering gazes, walking toward the exit. The moment he did, a flurry of camera flashes went off, the journalists' voices overlapping as they called out to him. "Mr. Rivers, were you aware of the children? Did your fiancé know? Are you planning to take responsibility?" He ignored them, his jaw set, his body moving on autopilot as he left the venue. The night air was cold against his skin, but it did little to cool the fire of emotions building inside him. His security team had already ensured that no one would follow, but the damage was done. Tomorrow, the headlines would right themselves. Billionaire CEO's wedding ruined by secret family. Adam Rivers' hidden children. Scandal at the society event of the year. He exhaled sharply, running a hand through his hair, pacing slightly as he tried to focus his thoughts. Naomi had left. The boys had left. And he had let them go. The realization sat like lead in his stomach. It should have been easy to walk away from this. He had spent his entire life prioritizing business over personal matters, ensuring that emotions never dictated his actions. He had built his empire on discipline, on decisiveness. And yet, the image of his sons, lingered in his mind, refusing to be ignored. Naomi had spoken with finality, as if she had given him his chance and he had already failed. But he knew better than anyone that nothing was final until he decided it was. For the first time in years, Adam Rivers was faced with a problem that could not be solved by strategy, by acquisition, by influence. For the first time in years, he had something to lose. Adam sat alone in his penthouse, the city stretching out beneath him in a vast sea of lights. He had built this life brick by brick, made himself into a man who controlled everything: business, wealth, influence. Yet tonight, for the first time in years, he felt as if he had no control at all. The wedding, the event that was supposed to be the pinnacle of his success, had crumbled into chaos. The headlines had already begun circulating. Photos of Naomi standing in the grand hall, flanked by the 3 boys who were unmistakably his, had spread across the internet at lightning speed. Speculation ran wild. Had he known? Had he abandoned them? What would happen now? He ignored his phone, which buzzed incessantly with calls from investors, PR advisors, and people who thrived on scandal. He ignored the emails from his legal team advising him on potential damage control. He ignored everything except for the thought looping in his head, unrelenting. Naomi had come. She had brought them, and now they had walked away. The silence of the penthouse felt suffocating. He rose to his feet, restless, pacing the room with tight, deliberate steps. His reflection stared back at him from the floor-to-ceiling windows, polished, composed, but with eyes that betrayed the storm inside. He wasn't a man who dwelled on mistakes. He analyzed them, corrected them, moved forward. But this wasn't a mistake that could be undone with a strategic move or a carefully crafted press release. This was something deeper, something personal. For the first time in years, he thought about Naomi in a way that wasn't shadowed by resentment or detachment. He thought about the woman she had been when they were together. She had been fierce, passionate, unyielding in her beliefs. She had loved him, truly loved him, not for his wealth or his ambitions, but for the man beneath it all. And he had taken that love for granted. He had expected her to bend to his world, to understand that his time, his focus, his energy belonged to something greater than a relationship. When she had asked for more of him, more of his presence, more of a future that wasn't dictated by corporate deals, he had seen it as a distraction. And so she had left. He had told himself it was for the best, that she had never understood the sacrifices required for success, that she had been weak, unwilling to endure what was necessary. He had believed it for so long that it had become truth in his mind. But now, standing here, his empire at his feet, yet feeling as though he had lost something far more valuable, he saw things differently. She had not been weak. She had walked away not because she couldn't handle his world, but because she had refused to be diminished by it. She had chosen something greater than ambition. She had chosen a life of meaning. She had chosen to raise his children alone rather than fight for a place beside a man who never made room for her. The thought hit him harder than he expected. She had done it alone. Caleb, Jaden, and Eli. 3 boys, his boys. He had missed their first steps, their first words, their birthdays, every scraped knee, every school project, every bedtime story. He had been absent from their lives in a way that could never be undone. Guilt settled deep in his chest, heavier than anything he had felt before. He had thought himself invincible, immune to regrets. But this was regret in its purest, rawest form. He thought of Naomi standing before him, composed and unwavering, as she delivered the truth to his face. She had not accused him, had not demanded anything from him. She had simply given him the chance to step up or walk away. And he had let her walk out that door. His hands curled into fists at his sides. No, this wasn't over. He had spent his life making things happen. He had never been a man who let opportunities slip through his fingers, never let circumstances dictate his future. Naomi may have given him a choice, but that didn't mean she had taken the decision away from him. He turned abruptly, grabbing his phone from the coffee table. He scrolled through his contacts until he found the one he hadn't used in years. Naomi Brooks. His thumb hovered over the call button. Would she answer? Would she even listen? Did he deserve for her to? His jaw tightened. It didn't matter. Whether she wanted to hear it or not, he had to say it. He hit call, the phone rang once, twice, then it went to voicemail. Her voice came through the receiver, smooth, calm, carrying a weight of quiet resolve. You've reached Naomi. Leave a message. The beep sounded, and for a moment he didn't speak. He wasn't a man who left messages. He wasn't a man who waited for responses. But tonight, he wasn't the man he had always been. Finally, he exhaled and spoke. Naomi, I need to see them. A pause. His voice steady but with an edge of something unfamiliar, something close to vulnerability. Tell me where. He ended the call and set the phone down. One way or another, he was going to fix this, or at least he was going to try. Adam sat in his car outside the park, gripping the steering wheel as he watched the scene unfold before him. The morning sun cast a warm glow over the playground, where children laughed and ran through the grass. The rhythmic creaking of the swings mixed with the occasional bark of a dog, the world carrying on as if nothing had changed. But for him, everything had changed. Naomi sat on a bench, her posture relaxed but her gaze ever watchful. Her sons, his sons, were scattered across the playground, each engaged in something different. Caleb, the boldest, was climbing up the jungle gym, testing his limits as he maneuvered from one rung to the next. Jaden, more cautious, was kicking a soccer ball, his movements precise and controlled as he practiced shooting against an empty goal. Eli, the quietest, sat with a sketchbook balanced on his lap, his fingers moving in steady strokes across the page. Adam exhaled slowly, his heartbeat heavier than it should have been. He had closed billion-dollar deals without flinching, built an empire from nothing with relentless determination. And yet, stepping out of this car felt like the hardest thing he had ever done. He had seen the way Naomi had looked at him at the wedding, the finality in her eyes, the way she had spoken with such certainty. She had not begged him to step into his sons' lives. She had simply given him the opportunity. The choice had been his, and now, here he was, about to make it. He pushed open the car door and stepped onto the pavement, his polished shoes feeling almost out of place against the worn sidewalk. The park was a world away from the circles he moved in, from the boardrooms and skyscrapers that defined his existence. And yet, it was here, in this ordinary setting, that he faced the most important decision of his life. Naomi noticed him first. Her eyes flickered to him, unreadable, but she did not rise from the bench. She simply watched as he approached, her expression giving nothing away. He could feel the weight of her silence, the unspoken question hanging in the air. He stopped a few feet away, his gaze shifting to the boys. None of them had noticed him yet. His fingers curled at his sides, uncertainty unfamiliar and unwelcome. He had spent his life commanding attention, owning every room he walked into. But this was different. This was not a meeting to be controlled, not a negotiation to be won. This was something far more delicate. Caleb was the first to spot him. He paused at the top of the jungle gym, his small hands gripping the bars as he narrowed his eyes. For a moment, he simply stared, his young mind processing the sight of the man who, up until 2 days ago, had been nothing more than a vague idea, a missing piece of a puzzle he hadn't known he was trying to solve. Then Jaden saw him too, his soccer ball rolling to a stop as he froze mid-step. His reaction was different, less openly scrutinizing, more careful. He glanced at Naomi first, as if waiting for some unspoken cue on how he should react. Eli, the last to notice, hesitated, his pencil pausing against the sketchbook. His eyes, identical to Adam's, flickered between his mother and the stranger standing before them. There was no immediate recognition, no instinctual connection, just quiet curiosity. Adam cleared his throat, suddenly feeling too large, too imposing in this space. He had rehearsed what he would say, had gone over every possible opening in his mind. But now, standing here, none of it felt right. Naomi finally spoke, her voice even. "Boys," she said, her tone calm but carrying weight, "this is Adam Rivers. Not your father, not Dad, just his name. A title, nothing more." The implication was clear. She would not define this relationship for them. They would decide for themselves what, if anything, he would be to them. Caleb climbed down from the jungle gym, brushing dirt from his hands as he stepped forward, unafraid. He was the bold one, the leader. His small frame squared up as he stared up at Adam, arms crossed. "You're the guy from the wedding," he said bluntly. Adam nodded, unsure of how to respond. "I am." Jaden joined his brother, his expression more guarded. "Why are you here?" Adam hesitated. There were 100 different ways to answer that question, 100 ways to shape the narrative. But, for once in his life, he didn't want to construct a perfect response. He wanted to be honest. "Because I should have been here sooner," he admitted, his voice quieter than he intended. Eli remained seated on the bench, watching, his sketchbook still open on his lap. Naomi didn't intervene, didn't push them to respond. She simply waited, letting the moment unfold as it would. Caleb frowned, his gaze sharp. "So why weren't you?" The question cut deeper than it should have. It was a child's question, direct, uncomplicated, yet it held a weight that Adam wasn't prepared for. He had spent his life dodging accountability, spinning narratives to fit whatever outcome he needed, but there was no sidestepping this. "I didn't know about you," he said, the words feeling inadequate. "If I had, things would have been different." Caleb didn't look convinced. He was young, but not naive. People find out things when they want to. The statement was a challenge, one that Adam knew he deserved. He could have looked for Naomi. He could have checked in on her after their divorce, could have cared enough to wonder where she had gone, but he hadn't. He had let go of their past without a second thought, too consumed by his own ambitions to consider that she might have been carrying more than just a broken heart when she walked away. Eli finally spoke, his voice softer than his brother's, but no less direct. "Are you staying?" The question hit him differently than the others. "Are you staying?" It wasn't just about this moment, about this visit. It was about permanence, about consistency, about whether he would be another passing figure in their lives, here today, gone tomorrow. Adam met his gaze, seeing his own reflection in those dark eyes. He thought about the empire he had built, the wealth he had amassed, the countless things he had prioritized over people. And for the first time, he realized that none of it mattered if he couldn't answer this question. "I want to," he said. The words weren't a promise, not yet, but they were a beginning. Naomi exhaled quietly, the slightest shift in her expression the only indication that she had expected anything less. The boys exchanged glances, their reactions mixed. Caleb skeptical, Jaden thoughtful, Eli unreadable. But none of them walked away. And for now, that was enough. The next few weeks unraveled in ways Adam could have never predicted. His life, once an unshakable pillar of structure and dominance, now revolved around 3 small boys who did not yet trust him, a woman who no longer looked at him with admiration, and a reality that was slipping further from his control with each passing day. For the first time in years, he was uncertain. His world had always been built on calculated moves, yet here he was, stepping into the unknown without a strategy to guide him. His first encounters with the boys were cautious, distant. Caleb, ever the leader, kept his guard up, watching him with narrowed eyes, never fully convinced of Adam's intentions. Jaden was less confrontational, but equally wary, studying him as if trying to determine whether this sudden presence in their lives was something temporary or something real. Eli, the quietest, simply observed, speaking only when necessary, but his gaze carried a depth that unsettled Adam. They were testing him, each in their own way. They did not give trust easily, nor did they expect anything from him. That, more than anything, told Adam how deeply they had learned to live without him. He was not someone they had waited for. He was not someone they had spent years hoping would come back. To them, he was an outsider, a name they had heard but never spoken, a stranger who shared their blood but nothing else. And that, more than anything, made him realize the true cost of his absence. Naomi did not interfere. She did not push the boys to accept him, nor did she shield them from the disappointment that could come if Adam failed to follow through. She simply watched from a distance, letting him figure it out on his own. If she had any expectations of him, she did not voice them. But in her silence, in the way she held herself back, he understood. If he was going to be in their lives, it had to be on their terms. No shortcuts, no grand gestures, just time, patience, and the slow, difficult process of proving himself. The first real breakthrough came unexpectedly. It was a late afternoon when Adam arrived at Naomi's modest home, invited but not yet welcomed. The boys were outside, playing in the yard, their laughter drifting through the air. He watched them from the porch, hesitant before stepping down onto the grass. Caleb noticed him first, pausing mid-chase, his eyes narrowing with something akin to suspicion. "What are you doing here?" Caleb asked, crossing his arms. Adam met his gaze steadily. "I wanted to see you." Jaden, more diplomatic, glanced toward Naomi, who stood nearby, arms crossed as she observed the interaction. She didn't interfere. She simply waited. Eli, silent as always, continued drawing in his notebook, seemingly uninterested in the exchange. But Adam saw the way his fingers gripped the pencil a little tighter. He was listening. Adam hesitated, then reached into the bag he had brought with him. He pulled out a soccer ball and held it out toward Jaden, whose gaze flickered with something unreadable. It was the same brand Jaden had been kicking around the first time Adam saw him at the park. The same one that had seen better days. "I thought you might need a new one," Adam said. Jaden looked at the ball for a long moment before finally stepping forward and taking it. He didn't thank him, but he didn't reject it either. It was a small victory, but a victory nonetheless. Caleb, ever defiant, scoffed. "You think you can just bring us stuff and we'll like you?" Adam didn't flinch. He met Caleb's challenge head on, recognizing the fight in him, the same stubbornness that had once fueled Adam's own rise to power. "No," Adam said simply. "I don't expect you to like me just because I showed up, but I'm here, and I'm not leaving." Caleb held his gaze for a long moment before finally looking away. He didn't argue, didn't press further, but for the first time Adam saw something in his eyes that wasn't just suspicion. It was something closer to curiosity. From then on, Adam made a conscious effort to show up. Not just when it was convenient, not just when it was expected, but because he wanted to. He learned their schedules, memorized the things that mattered to them. He found himself attending Jaden's soccer games, sitting on the sidelines as his son played with a determination that was both impressive and humbling. He watched as Caleb fearlessly climbed trees, daring himself to go higher, unafraid of falling. He saw the way Eli disappeared into his sketchbook, creating worlds with his pencil, lost in the kind of focus Adam knew all too well. He learned their habits, their quirks, the small details that made them who they were. Jaden always tied his shoelaces twice. Caleb never backed down from a challenge, even when it was reckless. Eli spoke in short sentences, but when he did, his words carried weight. They did not make it easy for him. They did not accept him with open arms. But slowly, cautiously, they began to let him in. The real test came one evening when Naomi had to work late, leaving Adam with the boys for the first time. It was not a planned arrangement, nor was it something Adam had been prepared for. But when Naomi called him unexpectedly, asking if he could stay with them for a few hours, he didn't hesitate. He arrived at the house to find the boys already halfway through dinner. Caleb barely looked up from his plate. Jaden eyed him curiously, as if wondering whether Adam would know what to do with 3 children on his own. Eli remained quiet, his gaze flickering between Adam and his brothers. The next few hours were a blur of controlled chaos. Caleb challenged him to a game of basketball in the driveway, clearly intending to test his patience more than his skills. Jaden focused on perfecting a trick shot with his soccer ball, determined to get it just right before moving on. Eli, surprisingly, sat beside Adam on the porch, sketching quietly, saying nothing but not moving away either. It was new. It was strange. It was the hardest thing Adam had ever done. By the time Naomi returned, the boys were sprawled across the couch, exhausted from the day. Adam sat in the armchair, watching them, feeling something he couldn't quite define. It wasn't victory, wasn't a sense of accomplishment in the way he was used to. It was something softer, something deeper. Naomi studied him for a moment before nodding slightly. "They didn't chase you out," she remarked, amusement lacing her tone. Adam exhaled, leaning back against the chair. "Not yet." She didn't say anything else. She didn't need to. For the first time, he felt like he had taken a step toward something real, something worth fighting for. The days blurred into weeks, and before Adam could fully process it, his life had taken a different shape. He still held power, still commanded boardrooms and dictated the course of billion-dollar deals. But now there was something else woven into his daily existence. His mornings no longer started with urgent emails and the weight of endless meetings. Instead, they sometimes began with Jaden kicking a soccer ball against his car tires, waiting for Adam to step outside. They sometimes included Caleb daring him to a game of basketball, his competitive spirit refusing to accept an easy win. and sometimes they were as simple as Eli quietly handing Adam a sketchbook filled with intricate drawings that spoke of thoughts the boy rarely put into words. At first, Adam had thought that proving himself to his sons would be the hardest part. He had expected their distrust, had braced himself for the rejection. And while those challenges had certainly existed, what surprised him most was the slow, inevitable shift in his own perception of what truly mattered. He had spent his life convinced that success was a solitary pursuit, that anything not directly contributing to his empire was a distraction, but standing on the sidelines of Jaden's soccer game, watching Caleb's determination in every competition, seeing Eli's artistic mind come alive in quiet moments, those were things that could not be measured in profit margins or stock value. Naomi had noticed the change, though she never commented on it outright. She remained distant in some ways, still guarded, still unwilling to let herself believe that this was anything more than temporary. She had seen too many promises broken before. She had raised these boys alone, never expecting Adam to return, and she would not be easily convinced that his presence was here to stay. But there were moments, small, fleeting moments, where something softened in her gaze, where she looked at him not with skepticism, but with something closer to understanding. It was during one of these moments, on a quiet evening when the boys had fallen asleep after a long day outside, that Adam found himself alone with Naomi in her kitchen. The air was still, the only sound the hum of the refrigerator and the occasional creak of the house settling. She stood by the sink, rinsing dishes, and he leaned against the counter, watching her. "You didn't have to stay this long," she said without looking at him. "No one expected you to." Adam exhaled slowly, rolling the thought over in his mind. He could have answered with something flippant, something defensive. Instead, he chose honesty. "I didn't expect to either," he admitted. She finally turned, her dark eyes meeting his. "And yet, you did." He nodded. "And yet, I did." There was a long silence between them, not uncomfortable, but heavy with meaning. He saw the unspoken words in her expression, the questions she was too careful to ask. Would he stay? Was this real? Could she trust him not to disappear again? He didn't have easy answers, but he knew one thing with certainty. "I don't want to go back to how things were," he said quietly. She studied him for a long moment, searching his face for the truth. "And what does that mean, Adam?" It meant everything. It meant that his world had changed. It meant that the ruthless, relentless man he had been, the one who had once left her behind without a second thought, was no longer the man standing before her now. It meant that for the first time in his life, he was choosing something that had nothing to do with power or control or ambition. "I want to be here," he said simply, "with them, with you." Naomi's breath hitched slightly, but she quickly masked it, looking away as if afraid to let herself believe it. "You say that now," she murmured. "But what happens when your world pulls you back in? When the next deal, the next opportunity demands your attention?" He could have promised that it wouldn't. He could have sworn that things would be different. But words were meaningless without action. And Naomi had spent too many years raising their children alone to be swayed by empty assurances. Instead, he took a different approach. "I put my company in the hands of my board today," he said. Her head snapped back to him, her expression unreadable. "What?" "I'm stepping back, delegating, not walking away completely, but I don't need to be in every meeting, don't need to control every move the company makes." He let out a slow breath. "I've spent my whole life chasing something I thought was the most important thing in the world, And then I realized I'd already lost the one thing that actually mattered. Naomi stared at him, searching for any sign of hesitation, any indication that this was just another strategic move. But there was none. "Why now?" she asked finally. Adam ran a hand through his hair, exhaling as he tried to put it into words. "Because I thought I had everything," he admitted. "And then you walked into that wedding with them, and I realized how much I had lost." Her lips parted slightly, but she didn't speak. "I missed their whole lives, Naomi," he continued, his voice quieter now. "I missed their first steps, their first words. I missed birthdays, school events, scraped knees, bedtime stories, and I can't get that time back. But I can be here now, if you let me." For the first time, Naomi looked shaken. Not angry, not guarded, just uncertain. "You don't get to just decide that," she whispered. "You don't get to show up and expect everything to fall into place." "I know," he said. "That's why I'm not asking you to believe me right now. I'm just asking you to let me prove it." The silence stretched between them, heavy with years of hurt, of regret, of missed chances. Then, slowly, Naomi nodded. "You have a lot to prove," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I know," Adam replied, "and I will." The road ahead would not be easy. Trust would not be rebuilt overnight. The past could not be erased. But for the first time in his life, Adam Rivers was willing to fight for something more than just success. And this time, he wouldn't let it slip away. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to subscribe for more. Don't forget to share this video with your friends and let us know your thoughts in the comments. Check out our other videos and stay tuned for the next one.